Okay, so in this lecture, I want to start talking about abortion and personhood. Get into a bit more of what this means, and maybe ask if this is really the key question in thinking about abortion, even though a lot of people tend to assume it is. Um, we'll notice that both Markey and Thompson try to step away from this personhood question, and I want to say a little bit, or at least set up the reasons why they do this. So before we get into this, I think it's good to be clear what we mean by personhood. By personhood, we mean moral personhood. When we ask, is something a person, there's a lot of different things we might mean. We might mean legal personhood. We might mean, I don't know. The legal's a big one, but I'm guessing there are other things we might mean, right? Moral personhood is a very specific question. When we say is something a person in this moral sense, we mean, does it have the moral status of normal adult human beings, also children, or not, right? We think that, human beings are special, we deserve a certain kind of treatment, people shouldn't interfere with our behavior without good reason. Most importantly, they certainly shouldn't kill us, right? Children, less persons, in some sense, we think it's easier to justify interfering with their behavior. But in a very, in the important sense of personhood here, of course, it's wrong to kill them, right? So, personhood is the question whether something that has this moral status that we think human beings normally have or not. So, now some people might say, well, of course, it's obvious that the fetus should have this status. You keep talking about human beings. Well, what else could the fetus possibly be, right? And this is a biological account of personhood. The biological account of personhood says moral person equals biologically human. Seems like it makes sense to start with. I'm already saying, well, the rights that human beings have, well, why not just cut out all this roundabout talk about personhood and just say, well, person equals human being and vice versa. And it's worth saying, it's worth emphasizing, many people on the pro-life side like this argument. They like this argument because maybe they have other reasons, but I think largely because it gets them or seems to get them the conclusion they want. Why? Well, fetus is biologically human, it seems. What else could it be? It's biologically human at all stages of development. So it is a moral person at all stages of development. This seems to set you up for an argument that says, well, it has a right to life at all stages of development. Well, would seem that abortion then is seriously immoral. The thing is, the biological account has some really serious problems. Markey talks about these in passing, I think he makes them pretty clear, but I want to just kind of dig into them a little more deeply and make them a bit clearer. So why do I say the biological account has serious problems? Well, look, how do we evaluate, how do we judge an account of moral personhood to start with? How do we decide whether it's a good account or not? Now look, obviously, and we'll talk about this in a minute, actually in the next lecture, it's not enough that the account gets us answers we like, right? We can't just pick a definition or an account because it says what we want it to say. What other ways are there to judge an account of personhood? Well, there are some things we are very, very sure are persons. You, whoever is listening to this, me, everyone else in the class, we are persons, right? There are pretty clearly things that aren't, right? I'm holding up, if I were in class, it'd be easier to be theatrical. You can't see this. I'm holding up a pencil sharpener. Pretty clearly, Mr. Pencil Sharpener is not a person, right? I'm not going to do this because I actually like this pencil sharpener. But if I stomped on it and broke it into a million pieces, no one would have any ground to complain because it's my pencil sharpener. I have rights. I'm a person. It's not, right? So, good account of personhood. It should let all of us in. It should keep out stuff that clearly isn't a person, like, say, a pencil sharpener or something like that, right? The biological account does really badly with both of these. Well, why do I say this? Well, for one thing, it's not going to do anything as dumb as letting in pencil sharpeners as persons, but it does seem like it lets in things that aren't persons, pretty clearly aren't, right? Marquis talks about this with bags of blood, but look, what is blood if it's human blood, it's pretty clearly biologically human, right? Well, it would be absolutely crazy to say that a bag of blood is a human being, right? If I'm giving blood and the person taking the blood drops the bag and it bursts on the floor, he or she's probably going to get in trouble. That's a bad thing to have done. Somebody could have used that blood. It's going to be a big mess. But they haven't committed murder, right? A bag of blood is not a person. And if you say that it is, that is a dumb thing to say, right? If your theory makes you say that a bag of blood is a person, your theory is not a good one. But the biological account seems like it does, right? Blood is certainly biologically human in some sense. What else would it be if it comes from a human being? It's not canine, it's not feline, right? Well, biologically human, right? Same goes, Marquis doesn't really hammer home the point with this, but the same goes for, say, hair and fingernail clippings and whatever, right? That stuff is biologically human. When the barber sweeps out his barber shop, he has not done anything wrong. So it seems that the biological account is open to some pretty obvious counterexamples. Biological account seems like it would say bag of blood or pile of hair is a person. That's just stupid. That's a good reason to reject the biological account. Now, look, as I've said before, when you run into a counterexample, there are different possible responses, right? You might give up your theory, you might try to patch it up. And, try to patch it up in a way that avoids the counterexamples, right? So, this biological account of humanity might say, well, biologically human, it isn't enough that you have human DNA or come from a human being. It has to have human DNA and human biological structure. Bag of blood doesn't have biological structure, doesn't have enough of it, or doesn't have the right kind. Pile of hair doesn't. Pile of fingernail clippings doesn't, right? Well, is this going to work? Well, no, for a few reasons. One, it's not enough to kind of wave your hands and point and say human biological structure. You need to give me an account of what you mean by human biological structure. What is it? how much of it do you need to be a biological human and therefore a moral person on this account? The problem here, too, is depending on what you say for human biological structure, once you start filling this in, it probably won't have the result that pro life people want the argument to have. You know, if you need to have a biological structure a lot like ours, then fetuses at early stages of development won't have it. Fetuses with severe, birth defects, abnormalities, might not have it. Fetuses with genetic conditions, again, it depends on how you work this out, they might not have it. And if they don't, they wouldn't be persons by this biological account. And so abortion in those cases would be perfectly permissible. So, not clear if this solves the problem or not. You need to give some account of biological structure, but once you start filling that in, you're probably going to get conclusions that people on the pro-life side don't like. So it's unclear what attraction this account would have even for them. One final point against the biological account is this. Even if we got a perfectly good biological account, and even if somehow this account got the results that people on the pro-life side want, fetuses are biologically human, other stuff isn't, it seems like this account would leave out things that pretty clearly would be persons if they existed. Let me give you an example, right? Let's imagine, this is a little far-fetched, but not that far-fetched. Imagine that we discover intelligent life, right? Imagine we discover aliens. They don't really look like us, but they can speak. They pretty clearly think like we do. They care for each other. They can do everything we do, but maybe they just don't look very much like us, right? We want these to be friendly aliens. Imagine, like, if you guys have ever seen Arrival, really good movie. I'd recommend it in very high terms. The aliens in Arrival are, I think, something like 15 feet tall. They have 7 arms. They breathe something besides oxygen. I forget what it is. They're pretty clearly not human. But they use language, they think, they have concern for us and each other. They're pretty clearly, most of us would say, persons. If we discovered aliens like that, or if they came to visit us, it would be wrong just to kill them without a good reason. We seem to think they would be persons, right? Mr. Data in Star Trek The Next Generation, or Mr. Spock in Star Trek, again, they look a lot more like us. They don't have our biology. If beings like that really do exist, we couldn't just chop them up for the fun of it, right? Or if you want to be a little less far-fetched, imagine that, and this is not too hard to imagine, still science fiction, but not so far out. Imagine that we genetically engineer animals that are every bit as intelligent as we are. They can speak, they can think, they can do everything you or I can do. We would probably, I think most of us would say, it would be wrong to kill those animals. We would think they're persons, right? If we created super intelligent chimpanzees, I couldn't just say, well, yes, it can talk, it can write, it can reason, it can do anything you or I can do, but you know what? It's a chimp, so kill it if you feel like it, right? Or if we create intelligent computers, again, science fiction, but not that far out, we couldn't just say, well, it's got circuits, it's not got flesh and blood, unplug it when you feel like it, right? Or think about animal rights, right? I don't want to get too deeply into it. I'm not going to judge whether animals have rights or not. But, if you think they do and you say, well, look how smart dolphins are. Dolphins have a pretty, as far as we can tell, they do. They have a pretty complicated language. They can actually, it seems, recognize written language. They can recognize themselves in a mirror. They have a sense of who they are. They feel really complicated emotions. If I tell you all that, if you say, well, dolphins don't seem like they're quite as smart as we are, there's stuff we can do they can't, that seems relevant. That seems like a decent response to what I'm saying. If you just say, well, yeah, but look at them, they're not people, so who cares how smart they are, what they can do, that just seems an arbitrary response, right? Same when we talk about elephants. Elephants are smart, they're very social. If you just say, well, yeah, but look at it, it's got a big old trunk and, it's huge, it's not a person. You want to shoot an elephant, shoot away, right? If you say, well, they might be smart, they're not as smart as we are, they might be able to do this stuff, they can't do everything we can, that seems relevant. Just pointing out the fact that they look different from us and their internal structure is different from us, that just seems completely irrelevant, right? And that's what the biological account does. And that's one of the main reasons that Marquis will say, and I think he's right about this, the biological account is just a bad account of personhood. Well, all of this suggests another account of personhood. And I'll call this the mental abilities account of personhood. So, person equals has mental abilities of normal human being. Why are we persons? Why do we deserve respect? It all goes back to our mental abilities. We can reason, we can use language. We know who and what we are. We can recognize other human beings. So on and so forth. Now, this account of personhood does seem to have pro-choice implications, right? Why? Well, if we're focusing on mental abilities, the fetus doesn't seem like it has any of those. Pretty clearly not, right? In fact, there are some famous pro-choice arguments that work with this account of personhood. There's one I actually considered giving you guys by Marianne Warren, where she argues, well, she gives a more developed account of what mental abilities you need, and then she says, well, the fetus doesn't have any of them, so it's pretty clearly not a person, so abortion should be allowed. Well, like I said, we have to ask ourselves not just, do we get the conclusion we want, or maybe don't want, whatever, I don't know which side of this you're on, but not just, well, do we like the conclusion we get from this account or not? We have to ask ourselves, is it a good account of personhood? It seems a lot better account of personhood than is the biological account. It is much less arbitrary. It would let in intelligent aliens. It would let in super intelligent genetically engineered animals. It would let in Mr. Data and Mr. Spock. It would let in computers that have the same level of intelligence as you or I. It also doesn't run into the same sorts of counterexamples as does the biological account, right? Hair, bags of blood, fingernails, whatever, they don't have mental abilities, so obviously this mental abilities account is not going to say they're persons. And, when we start talking about, say, whether animals are persons, some kinds of animals, it doesn't seem like this account trots out arbitrary reasons, right? It says, well, how smart are they? What kind of mental abilities do they have? Do they really have the same level we do? You know, if you say, well, it's a person because it can do all this stuff we can do mentally, and I say, no, it's not because it doesn't look like us, that seems completely arbitrary. That's just changing the subject for a stupid reason. If you say that, and I say, well, I don't think it's a person because there's still some stuff we can do mentally it can't, buy it or not, don't buy it, agree or not agree, but at least that seems like a smart, intelligent, on the subject kind of response, right? So, the mental abilities account of personhood is, I think, a much better one on many levels than the biological account. Well, thing is, better does not mean good, though, right? Something can be better than something else in the sense it's not as bad. Problem with the mental abilities account is that it also seems to be open to fatal counterexamples. Well, what are they? Think about this for a second. Person equals has mental abilities of normal human being. Now fill that in whatever way you want. Think about how you might get a counterexample. Well, depending on what those abilities are, maybe children have them, maybe they don't, maybe certain people who aren't that intelligent don't have them, whatever. We can argue back and forth on that. But you know what pretty clearly does not have mental abilities? Well, infants, especially very young infants, newborns, infants that are only a few days or a few weeks old. They certainly don't have these mental abilities, however you cash out the mental abilities, right? Well, if you need to have these abilities, these mental abilities to be a person, and infants don't have them, then infants aren't persons either. And if infants aren't persons, then it pretty clearly seems as though this mental abilities account would say that it's okay to kill infants without a good reason. That's a huge counterexample, right? If your theory says that infanticide for no good reason or not a very good reason is permissible, your theory has went really badly off the rails, right? There are some philosophers, Jeff McMahon, I don't know where he is these days, Peter Singer at Princeton, they'll say stuff like this and they're like, well, I don't see the problem, right? Yes, my theory says that infanticide is not bad. What's the big deal? I don't know. I mean, as a professor of mine used to say, there's such a thing as being too clever to ever truly be intelligent. I suspect Singer and McMahon are too clever to ever be truly intelligent. They have all these clever arguments why infanticide isn't as bad as we think. That's just bonkers, though, right? If your theory says that infanticide's okay, infanticide being killing, actual infants after they've been born, your theory says that it's went off the rails. I don't care how clever your arguments might be, right? You know, other similar counterexamples, people in comas don't have these mental abilities. People who are temporarily insane might not. Seems wrong to kill them too, right? Now, there are ways to try to patch up the mental abilities account of personhood that deal with this. I'm not going to talk about those, you know, because I think Marquis' argument will preserve a lot of what we like about this mental abilities account. Well, but Marquis' argument is not going to have the same implications for the abortion debate. In fact, Marquis will say, my account will show that abortion is seriously immoral.